Trump has just announced a sweeping new tariff on cars.
What we're going to be doing is a 25% tariff on all cars that are not made in the United States.
Around 5:30, he came out and he said, tariffs on every car that gets imported into the U.S. from around the world. Then he talked about chips, then he talked about wood.
Canada will respond to the U.S. auto tariffs.
The beginning of this story doesn't resemble an ordinary trade dispute. It is already a large-scale geopolitical shock, the consequences of which could shift the balance of power across the entire North American continent. This is not just about a tariff. This is about the dismantling of the very economic architecture that took decades to build. So, on April 2nd, 2025, U.S., President Donald Trump officially announces all cars and light trucks imported into the country will be subject to a 25% tariff. No exceptions, no exemptions. Not even for Canada, which until that moment had been regarded in Washington as one of the guys in the North American club. The twist: no one expected the response to be so harsh and so fast. The very next day, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney announced a mirror measure, a 25% tax on cars, trucks, and vans from the United States. And at that moment, the real crash began. Shares of Tesla, Ford, and GMC began to fall, and alarm bells started ringing across the markets. "We have no choice but to defend our economic sovereignty," Carney stated. And these are not just words. In 2024 alone, automobile exports from the U.S. to Canada totaled approximately $26 billion. The new tariffs could reduce these volumes by 30 to 35%. That means a loss of $8 to $9 billion just from three brands: Tesla, Ford, and GMC. Why were these companies targeted? It's simple. They are symbols of American strength in the auto industry, and in the eyes of many Canadians, also symbols of Trump's protectionism. A provocative fact: Tesla, one of the flagships of electric transportation, earned $1.5 billion in Canada in 2024 alone. But now, with the removal of subsidies and the introduction of the new tariff, sales have already dropped by 13% in the first quarter of 2025. And this is just the beginning. The promise? If the escalation continues, a real storm awaits the market. The disruption will hit more than just exports of finished vehicles. Spare parts, technology, and licenses will also be affected. Everything that crosses the border becomes 25% more expensive. And that's by the most conservative estimates. A statistical contrast: before the conflict, more than 42% of all cars sold in Canada were American brands. Now analysts predict that share may fall to 25%. And who will take their place? Europeans and Asians, Hyundai, Volkswagen, and Kia are already in talks to expand their operations in Canada. An intriguing twist: unlike the United States, many European brands have stronger positions in Canada. Their products are not subject to such high tariffs, and the companies themselves see Canada as a launch pad for entering the North American market. If they begin building factories in Ontario, it could collapse the dominance of GM and Ford. In this light, Carney's words sound like an open attack. We will no longer be dependent on one country, even if it once called itself our ally. Emotional tension is rising among Canadians. Hashtags like "support domestic producers" are gaining popularity on social media. Small protests outside Tesla showrooms have already become a reality. And yet, Canada was once one of the most loyal markets for Elon Musk's brand. A contrast in opinions. While some believe the situation will spiral out of control and destroy the market, others see it as an opportunity for an industrial reset. For instance, Tesla may completely exit Canada, or conversely begin local assembly. But that would require billions in investment and years of time. Fact: Ford and GM have assembly lines in Canada, but a significant portion of components still comes from the United States. The new tariffs will make final assembly more expensive. And now the dilemma: either raise prices or lose margin. Meanwhile, experts say the entire North American market could lose between $13 and $18 billion by the end of 2025 in the automotive sector alone. That is the minimum, the maximum, the collapse of the entire supply chain and the destruction of logistics routes that took decades to build. A numerical contrast: previously Canada imported $40 billion worth of auto goods from the United States. Now, under a medium scenario, volumes could fall by $10 to $13 billion. The remaining $27 to $30 billion will carry an additional tax burden of $7 to $8 billion. Consumer losses, rising repair costs, increased prices for components, All of this is no longer a hypothesis, but a reality. Car repairs in Canada are becoming more expensive. The availability of American spare parts is declining, and service centers are losing customers. A question for reflection: can we still talk about any sort of partnership between the United States and Canada? At least in the automotive sector, it looks like a divorce. Cold, pragmatic, and quite painful. Attention to detail. Canadian officials are already discussing the creation of a green corridor for investors from the European Union and Asia. Volkswagen and Hyundai Kia are first in line. Their strategy: build in Canada, export to the United States, bypassing Trump's barriers. The blow to Washington will be not only economic, but also symbolic. Meanwhile, in the United States, stock prices continue to fall. Tesla loses 4% in a single day, GM and Ford, 2 to 3%. Investors are nervous. Analysts speak of long-term devaluation if diplomacy is not pursued. What's next? Either a new escalation of the conflict or an urgent attempt to negotiate. But judging by the rhetoric from both sides, diplomacy is not currently part of the equation. A provocative question: if Trump does not back down, and Canada continues to defend its sovereignty, could this mark the end of the North American integration that once seemed unbreakable? An appeal to emotion? Tell us what you think. Will Canada's 25% tariff be the nail in the coffin of American auto exports? Or on the contrary, will the United States rebuild its supply chains and emerge from this clash as the victor? Share your opinion. Your voice matters. Right now, history is changing before our eyes. And in this story, there are no guaranteed winners. But there are those who are already beginning to pay the price.